Family law is about people, not paperwork. Trusted by thousands of UK firms, Leap's legal software gives family lawyers a single, fully integrated platform to scale your practice, stay compliant, and deliver better client outcomes. Learn more at leap.co.uk.
You're listening to the Today's Family Lawyer podcast, the leading source of daily news and insight for family law practitioners in England and Wales. Sign up to our free weekly newsletter at todaysfamilylawyer.co.uk and subscribe to hear all the latest news and views from across the family law sector. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello, welcome along to the latest Today's Family Lawyer podcast. Today I welcome Neil Graham and Natasha Grande from G&G Law, a newly set up firm in the consultancy sort of style model, and some of that we'll get into in the course of the discussion today. Great to have you both on the podcast. Thanks very much indeed for joining. I wonder in the first instance you might do a much better introduction to yourselves. Neil, in the first instance, tell us about yourself and what you do.
Hello, David. My name's Neil Graham. I am one of the two partners in G&G Law, along with Natasha. It's a firm that we both founded in September 2025, and we advise on all aspects of family law. Basically, I provide legal advice to clients from all walks of life at any or various stages of their relationships on all aspects of family law. That can stem from starting with advising on a prenuptial agreement to advising on a financial settlement when a long marriage comes to an end, and on any other aspects and issues of law that arise in between, really.
Fab, thank you. And Natasha.
Hello, my name's Natasha Grande. I am a partner and co-founder at G&G Law. I advise on the full range of family law matters. I specialise in financial remedy work and private children work. And yes, we set up G&G Law in September last year and have never looked back.
You were telling me before we started recording that you've found the whole process quite liberating. You've both obviously been in your own firms as well previously. What was the first thing that kind of connected the two of you then, before you even perhaps thought about what G&G Law might look like?
That's a very good question. I mean, we both worked together at the same firm about 12 years ago. I was already on quite a journey. So I've been practicing family law for just over 28 years, having qualified as a lawyer in 1995. And I'd worked at a variety of firms, and three of them were top-tier Legal 500 rated family law firms. And Natasha and I were both working together at one of those firms, and we both had a synergy about the way we wanted to work and the way we approached our work. And I think it's fair to say that we were very much focused on the advice and delivering good advice to clients rather than any other issues. And it was that desire, I think, to give clear, common sense, proper advice to clients in an empathetic way, without, sugarcoating the advice, but being understanding of the personal circumstances in which those clients found themselves. That I think we both realised we had a shared approach to that, and it was something that we both felt quite strongly about. That's not to say that there aren't a lot of practitioners in family law who also have that approach, but it was, I think, the approach that really both brought us together. And we had a pipe dream to set up a law firm. We had a dinner about 8 years ago in a restaurant, Fitzrovia. Italian restaurant, I'd forgotten that. Shades of sort of Granita in Islington with Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, where we decided to start working together to set up a law firm. And it's taken us 8 years to do that. No doubt we can tell you a bit about that in a minute. But it was that shared approach to giving sensible, really good quality advice, telling the clients what their options were, giving them the pros and cons, giving them cost estimates, and allowing them to make informed decisions about how they wanted us to help them. That I think it was the common factor in our approach that led us to want to work together.
8 years feels like an awful long time to come to a decision. I mean, I think people would consider that to be a very well considered decision, Natasha.
Yes. So, I mean, it was very organic. So Neil trained me and I really enjoyed training with Neil. I think we then obviously went off to different firms, and Neil would be the phone call at the end of the day to obviously discuss what my day had looked like. And I think that sort of grew organically, that we were always in touch kind of personally and professionally. And I just always admired the way he worked. I'm not a morning person, but Neil would always greet me with a very cheerful, like, good morning when we worked together. We just got on. We had the same ethics and approach to our cases. And yes, I feel like we've worked together for the last 8 years, even though we haven't actually worked together, because obviously we've just got that, we've had that professional and personal connection.
I think it's fair to say that the relationship professionally was reciprocal, so it wasn't just Natasha phoning me, it was me bouncing ideas off her as another fellow practitioner, and being interested in someone else's objective view alongside your own objective view on how best to solve a problem. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, it's really fair to say.
Is that something you come across a lot in the profession? I mean, I guess there's lots of talk about mentorship and that sort of thing. And to the point that you've made, Natasha, about Neil training you, you've still got that relationship. But there seems to be a lot of value in being able to bounce things around people, in particularly in law, when, there can be a lot of subjectivity to some of those decisions.
Well, family law is ultimately discretionary, so obviously you will get it. But there's parameters of settlement. Having somebody to bounce something off, it's a very small profession, it's a close-knit profession, everybody is friends, they've worked together at different points. I think it's completely invaluable, both from the client's point of view, because you know that everything's being seriously considered, but also from a kind of mental health perspective for the lawyers, ensuring that you are able to reach out. And I think there's a very good supervision scheme that's been set up now. I think it was by Flip originally, but basically formalising this and inviting family lawyers to become supervisors. And I think that's really important. I think the profession's really advanced in that sense.
I think that's true, and the other thing to bear in mind about family law, and Natasha's completely right about the wide discretion that the courts have and judges have in deciding how much weight to attach to each of the Section 25 factors about how to redistribute assets on divorce. But also the other thing about family law is no two cases are really the same. There are no cases that have exactly the same facts, and that's because cases involve two people, or sometimes more if you've got an application in relation to children. No individuals are the same, and every relationship has a different dynamic, and so every case is different and every case is challenging, some more than others. And it's always extremely helpful to have someone, without breaching any client confidentiality, that you can just objectively bounce an idea off. And I think that's one of the really positive things about family lawyers, is when you go to these conferences and conventions, you find so many other family lawyers have had similar cases, but they're not exactly the same. And you can share these experiences of how to deal with cases and how to deal with knotty problems that may not even be reported in reported cases. And I think that's one of the really positive things about working in family law, is it is quite a close-knit community, and it is a very supportive community. That even if your opponent on the other side of a case, they might have a very tough case to pursue, and they might be pursuing it quite aggressively in accordance with instructions. But it's that sort of capacity to pick up the phone, which happens less now than it did in the past, that enables you to resolve disputes sometimes for your clients without having to go all the way to concluded hearings. And that's not possible if you don't foster that sort of supportive approach within the profession, I think.
Let's not skip forward 8 years completely, because that's an awful long time, isn't it? But at some point there was a relatively easy decision, from the sounds of it, that you both took to go it alone. I said at the start of the discussion that you've opted to go down this consultancy model route, and you're both practicing under the umbrella of Excello Law. How did you come to that decision rather than, for example, go and set up your own practice?
That's a very good question. We knew what we wanted to do. The challenge was finding a way to make it happen. With the conventional model, we would have had to have built up some capital, invested money in, office space, office equipment. We would have had a run-up period of time to sort out all our policies, our GDPR policy, our diversity policy, all those sorts of things, set up all our AML procedures, all those kind of regulatory issues. But the beauty of the Excello model, set up by George Bisnort as long as 2009, and then Joe Losty joined in 2013, 4 years later, is that the model that they've built enables lawyers to hit the ground running because you can bring your own identity in the form of their house of brands. They've got 14 separately branded firms alongside all the other lawyers. There are over 200 lawyers in XLO. And all that regulatory framework is in place. So as soon as you arrive, you hit the ground running and just simply start, working on your cases. And that's a huge relief, because lawyers are understandably increasingly regulated, like all professions, and that regulation in itself is almost an industry in itself. And when you're trying to start up your practice and you're trying to meet court deadlines and deal with meetings and draft documents and ensure that you file your pleadings on time, having all of that from day one was enormously helpful. And it just, without the heroes at XLO, we would not have been able to have done it. And I mean, it's two things. It's the uniqueness of the model that George set up, and Joe and George have both run with over the years, but also it's the really first-rate quality of the back office people, the people who provide the solicitors account support, who run all the risk identification, all the AML, anti-money laundering, all of that. They really are a fantastic team of people. It was the model that enabled us to make it happen. And they were incredibly supportive over a period of, I would say, about 2 years from when we first met them. They were incredibly patient with us. It was a very long gestation period. And they were just incredibly supportive from the first day that we made contact, and have continued to be since we've arrived. It was the attractiveness of that model to enable us just to start our practice and hit the ground running that meant it was, it's a horrible expression, but a no-brainer.
I've certainly heard, you might describe them as horror stories of people who sort of tried to set up or have set up their own practice, and it's taken an awful long time to do it. And of course, there's an operational thing there, in the sense that you can't be out of work for a huge amount of time because financial pressures or whatever. And of course, you're also, to your point about case deadlines and that kind of thing, Neil, you may well be working on things that you need to make sure that you continue. I mean, dare I ask, what was the reaction of your respective firms to the decision to launch G&G? Have they been supportive? Have you been able to kind of negotiate an exit, a clean exit?
We were both happy where we were. That was part of it as well. It was difficult to make that decision, because if you're unhappy, it's easy, right? But if you're happy, it's harder. They have been very supportive. I think there's been a lot of curiosity about the model. I think it is known, but it's relatively new. I took some cases with me, and again, as Neil's saying, what is wonderful about the model that we have is that we could focus on the clients, actually, and not be distracted by everything, or the headaches that come with a regulated practice, which is really important, because they need to feel reassured. And I think a lot of it was a personality fit as well, because with George and Joe and all the back office team that I met, we just felt very confident. And I actually, over the 2 years, the more meetings I had with them, I kept thinking, these are people that I actually want to be in business with. It was a finely balanced decision. We always knew we were going to set up. It was a question of when, not if, and it tipped the balance really at that particular moment, just because, as I said, the model is just so attractive, because obviously we're independent, but we've also got all the support. We've also got the best of both worlds, because XLO is this big umbrella. You've got a referral network, so we can refer, they can refer to us, but you've also got the social. So obviously I socialise with Neil as well, but we have all these events at XLO. So you've got that sort of feeling of being in a big firm, but you've got your independence as well. But yeah, the firms have been really supportive, and also the clients have been really supportive, and our friends in the profession, not to mention our poor families.
That's very true. I think, my firm was very supportive of my move and enabled clients' files to come over and migrate, so there was a seamless service for them, which is really all the clients are concerned about. Sure, they don't want an interruption in the care that they get simply because of some problem between two members of the profession. So my firm were very helpful. And I think what made it palatable and such a positive departure is that it wasn't that I didn't want to work there, it's just I preferred to work with Natasha. And so it wasn't a negative move, it was a positive move.
It's fairly well documented, this consultancy model. And I think one of the things that I particularly come across, it gets criticised for, is properly preparing people who make this jump and ensuring that they recognise that it's very, very different going from being within a firm environment to actually being responsible for running the firm? I mean, you talked, Neil, there about taking some of your own case files with you, for example. That presumably helps with some of that transition. But it's a big step going from being even a head of department, for example, to actually being in a position where you've got to source the work, you've got to deliver on the work as well, and make sure that you're keeping the business afloat at the same time.
It comes with a whole different set of problems. But if you've got a team of fabulous people supporting you behind the scenes with everything, they're problems that aren't overwhelming. They're problems you could overcome. I mean, one of the things I think we probably both hadn't really got our head around is dealing with accounting software and VAT quarterly returns and corporation tax and things like that, which you never had to think about beforehand. And building work and getting clients through the door. But there's a lot of help from Excello with networking and PR and cross-referral work within the organisation that makes those problems. You've got the freedom to do whatever you want, but you've got the backup and support in whatever way you want to go about it. Although it's a different setup, it's a very liberating setup, and it's really it's a community of fellow professionals within Excello. And the things that George and Joe were so keen to inculcate in Excello is excellence of legal advice, happiness of the lawyers, and the integrity of the lawyers and the way they go about their business. And we've really noticed that in all our dealings with our colleagues here and the team who support us in the back office. So it's been very liberating.
It's a two-way process, isn't it, Natasha, from what I understand? You guys have chosen the consultancy and the Excello route, but equally they have to choose you as well, don't they?
Say hello to Moneypenny. We're you when you can't be. Answering calls and qualifying leads, booking appointments, updating your case management system. We handle it all just like you would, with brilliant people, AI, or both. Visit moneypenny.co.uk today.
That's completely right. So there are, as I said, a series of interviews and meetings, and it's not a scary process. It's a given that you're a lawyer who enjoys giving advice and that you are at a certain, I suppose, level of expertise in your profession. That's a given. A lot of it is about, I suppose, being the sort of person that gets on with people and that they want to work with. So I think they chose us and we chose them. And it was slow and steady. And I'm pleased it was slow and steady, actually, because it did feel like a very carefully thought out decision, and actually for families as well, because we've been thinking about it for so long and they saw how long this process went on. I think it was reassuring for them. That's not to say that if you suddenly just wanted to be part of Excello and they wanted you to, they do move very quickly. It was us with our sort of processes, really. But yeah, as I said, it's not that we were unhappy at all. We were both at firms that had very good work and very good position, but actually we knew we could be happier working together because it's what we wanted to do.
Neil, you mentioned the launch of the business comes with some of that administrative chaos around accounts and all that kind of thing. What else do you wish that you had known back in September? And I appreciate it's a relatively short period of time to now, but what do you think you wish you'd known then that you know now?
I mean, I say I'm going to come on and answer that question. It's very annoying when someone answers a different question. But before I answer that, I wish I'd known before September last year how liberating the experience would have been, because I would have done it earlier. And sure. I think Natasha probably would have done it as well.
I say that every day.
Every time we've spoken to colleagues who set up their own firms in the past, the common response when I asked them whether they thought it was daunting is they all said, I just wish we'd done it earlier. That's the first observation. I think the second observation is I think I could have done with a bit of a run up to get my head around the accounting software, I think, probably. But that's probably more of a comment on my ineptitude IT-wise than on the accounting software. We've got a very good firm of accountants who help us on a monthly basis with all our queries. So I
think what you realise is you deal with people's assets in cases, and you deal with companies and all the rest of it. But what you don't know is the actual day-to-day practicalities and admin of it. And I think if I just prepared myself mentally for that, but it gets easier. Like, I feel on top of it now. Yeah, again, as Neil said, I wish we had done it earlier. Everybody says that. It's having that discretion yourself and being out of that sort of I've got to be online, 9 till 6. Everything's like hourly billing. Everything's organic. Like, if we're going to make a decision, we're across from each other and we just make a decision.
We don't have to go to a committee and get it through. By which stage the circumstances that led up to that decision you want to prove before have changed, So
it's nice being able to focus on the clients. That's what I find, actually. Like, they're just, being more back, just practicing them.
I think it's being able to make agile decisions quickly together has also been incredibly liberating. When you're running your own business, there's a responsibility that goes with it, but there's also a privilege, which is that you decide what you want to do. Although we're under the umbrella of Excello and part of their house of brands, they will support us in whatever we want to do to make our business successful. So there's a lot of different admin, but there's also a lot of liberating aspects to it.
I think it means more when it's your own. And the house of brands is really interesting because there's brands under there which just stay and build and they're so happy, and then there's others that sort of and Excello is really proud of it, that it's their launch pad and they go on and they become this massive international firm. So what Excello is interested in is supporting people who want to be entrepreneurs and want to do really good legal work. So I like that about them, that they just want to inspire people to run their own businesses, really.
And ambitions for G&G Law, obviously the two of you currently, do you feel as though that you're going to expand that further? Is it a case that you're quite happy doing what you're doing? I mean, obviously different people have got different ambitions, haven't they?
I think one of the unified ambitions we have is we want to expand. We're very proud of the quality of our work, and we want to increase our ability to deliver that quality work to as many clients who want to approach us for it.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I think we're obviously London based, but we do act for clients all over the country and all over the world, actually. So yeah, we'd love to expand. As I said, we've got a lot of people that we've enjoyed working with and enjoy being across in the profession. So it will be lovely to expand as and when the time is right. We've got the office space for it.
We'd love to be doing this podcast in 2 years' time and tell you that we've got more and more people working for us. We'd love that.
Well, we'll have to get you back at some point. Let's close the discussion more broadly on what's happening in and around family law. It feels as though, a constant state of change, really. Have you any thoughts or predictions as to what 2026 might bring, or 2026 and 27 might bring for family law in terms of changes to legislation, changes to interpretation? We may very well see some cohabitation reform at some point, he says, with his fingers very firmly crossed.
It's very interesting that you hit on cohabitation, because one of the things I was doing before we started this podcast was just get my head around what's happened in the last 25 years or so. And when I thought about it, there's so much that's happened in family. We started off with the Welfare and Pensions Reform Act in 1999, which enabled pension sharing orders to be made. Before that, you couldn't actually get a pension sharing order. You could only offset other capital. Then we had White and White 25 years ago, the House of Lords judgment that changed, manifestly changed, a sort of complete sea change, the way in which parties' financial claims were determined, no longer on the basis of need, but on the basis of fairness and sharing. Then you've had the Civil Partnership Act 2004, the Married Same-Sex Couples Act 2013, the Children's Families Act 2014. You had Grande and Radmacher in 2010 about prenuptial agreements. You've had significant changes in the procedure for victims of domestic abuse when they take part in proceedings. The court now has to consider if either the parties is vulnerable and whether measures should be put in place to help them in proceedings. Alongside that, you've had two major Law Commission reports, one on qualifying agreements and one on cohabitation, which you mentioned at the outset of this question. And also, alongside all of that, we've had the pandemic and the heroics of the court staff and the judiciary who kept all these cases going through two lockdowns. That's a huge amount of change in the last 25 years. And if things carry on at that pace, it will be very interesting. I think the two areas to watch are definitely cohabitation. I think you're quite right to mention that. The Law Commission produced a report on preparing some draft legislation, whether people should have to opt into that system or whether they should have to opt out and automatically they should be subject to cohabitation claims. Nothing's happened since then. In Australia, they've changed the law and there is you have to opt out. You automatically have claims if you cohabit for more than 3 years. I think that's a hot topic. I think you're quite right. If you look at the divorce rates In 1973, there were 106,000 divorces. In 1995, that had reached 160,000 a year. In 2024, that had dropped down to 103,000. And we know relationships are ending. We know in some age brackets up to 1 in 2 relationships end. So if you interpret those figures, the only way really to interpret that is that more and more people are being less formulaic and formal in the way that they recognise their relationships. They're not asking the state to recognise it. But they've still invested time, money, effort, the best parts of their lives, put their careers on hold for their partner to enable that relationship to flourish. And so I can't see a situation in which cohabitation won't be recognised more formally in law in the future. How long it takes and what government chooses to do it and when it becomes a vote winner, I've no idea. But it seems to me that that's an obvious area that's ripe for change. And the other area that's very interesting is Section 25, which family lawyers love, which is the piece of legislation, the Matrimonial Causes Act, that tells the court what factors they have to take into account and how much weight should they attach. Which is the weight they attach is obviously identified in the whole body of case law. And as Natasha said at the outset of this podcast, that legislation was deliberately designed to give judges discretion to decide, because each relationship is different, each case is different, how much weight to attach to all of those factors. And that discretion and the judgment of judges, who are the best placed people to exercise that judgment, has been a touchstone of family law for the last 50 years. But people are also finding that that gives rise to uncertainty. And there's this constant battle, I think, like sort of two equal and opposite force between discretion and certainty. And there are interesting, debates to be had around that. There are some countries where, there's a sort of algorithm that works out what your claims are. People would be horrified to think of that because of the 50 years of jurisprudence and case law of judges exercising careful judgment. But with increasing numbers of cases litigating, going through court, I don't know, maybe possibly in the years to come, there might be some reform to that. It's very difficult because obviously if you introduce certainty, you're then cutting back discretion. And so how you strike that balance and what is the right way to do it and where you draw the parameters, or whether you have a system whereby you can contract out of, or the court will let you take yourself out of that formulaic approach in the years to come because there are complicating factors to your case. I don't know, but I would think that the two areas where there might be some significant ongoing debate about changing the statutory legislation would be around cohabitation and around financial claims. But I'm not a betting man, so I may well be wrong.
I think pensions is going to be a huge one. I think I saw in Today's Family they had written about the pension gender gap. Pensions is a bit of a weird one. I feel like there's still a myth about pensions. We have a number of clients who they're not that interested in pensions and they want cash now. The president of the family division says it's basically the second largest asset after, quite often the house in the case. So it's so important. And I think there's just a bit of a myth that they're not really worth very much and you don't have to deal with them. As Neil was saying, you could only offset before and obviously now they need to be shared. And, I think there is awareness about, the fact that women are sort of losing out. They haven't had the sort of working patterns to build up their pension in the same way that men have. So I think that's a hot topic. The other one I do quite a lot on LinkedIn, and what I've noticed as well, and I think this extends to all of law and not just family law, is there's a bit of consciousness at the moment about this old-fashioned model of the Friday letter and what kind of language is being used in law to each other. And I think being more holistic, people being kind to each other, less litigation, more deal making, picking up the phone. I think that's going to be hot this year. I think there's a lot of lawyers on LinkedIn who are very openly now having a conversation with each other, both in the post and the comments, about how some ways, and it is the minority, some ways of practicing are just not good for the human soul, really. So I'm quite interested to see where that goes.
The other thing that we forget about is going to litigation, being involved in court proceedings is inherently stressful and traumatic for people. The rise of alternative non-court dispute resolution processes, whether that's mediation, arbitration, Natasha's going to talk a bit about Family Mediation Week in a minute.
Mediation Week.
Those processes, whether it's voluntary disclosure and sensible negotiations through solicitors, those alternative processes of resolving disputes, I think, can only enable the parties to disentangle themselves with less stress, which means that they're, better equipped to move on with their lives as soon as possible. And I think, particularly with this sheer amount of cases going through the courts and the Ministry of Justice cuts over the years by successive governments of different political persuasions, I think the more that the profession can do as a whole to find alternative ways of resolving those disputes outside court proceedings, like private FDRs, for example, that's not only going to enable resolutions to be reached more quickly, but it's also going to enable people to move on with their lives, I think, in a more positive way, without the bruising period of 12 months of litigation and uncertainty throughout those 12 months.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned family mediation there, Neil. Of course, we're recording during Family Mediation Week, which I know, for example, quite a number of the resources that are recorded this week are available for a period of time after, aren't they, Natasha?
Yes, absolutely. And I was really just going to plug the Family Mediation Council and resources, obviously like resolution during the week. Family Mediation Council run loads of events. We're going to a coffee morning at Flip this week, but there's also just a lot of information available all year round. And I think particularly with, what we've been saying about the courts, it's really good to encourage clients to go there and don't forget those resources are out there.
Fabulous, thank you. Well, that's as much as we've got time for the podcast. Great to have you both on, sharing just some insight and experience into your legal journeys, but also some of the decisions that you've made over the past few years that have led you to setting up G&G Law. I wish you all the very best of success with it, of course, and thank you so much for joining and being part of the podcast.
Thank you, David.
Thank you so much for having us.
The Today's Family Lawyer podcast is available on your preferred podcast provider. It's also available on today'sfamilylawyer.co.uk. My thanks to Neil and to Natasha. Thank you as ever for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
You're listening to the Today's Family Lawyer podcast, the leading source of daily news and insight for family law practitioners in England and Wales. Sign up to our free weekly newsletter at today'sfamilylawyer.co.uk and subscribe to hear all the latest news and views from across the family law sector. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.